In the previous video, we saw how we can customize MVC URLs by using the MVC routing engine. Now, in addition to customization, we would also like to set default values and validate the MVC URL. In other words, for example, here's a simple MVC URL I have, which helps me to fetch customer values or customer record. So now in this URL, if a person wants to go and fetch a customer record with the value 12, he has to just type here 12. So this will help me to browse the customer record with value 12. Now I would like to do a couple of things over here. First thing is, if I don't pass any value to this URL, in other words, I just go and browse http localhost/customer/view customer, I should get some default values. First thing. Second thing, I would also like, because the customer ID is numeric, I don't want people here to type customer name for searching. So any kind of alphanumeric values I would like to avoid over here. So the first point, how do we go and ensure that the inputs given to the MVC URL is proper, that is validation? And second, how do we go and specify default values in case the default values are not provided? So in this video, we are going to see that how we can set default values and validate the MVC URL. To understand the URL validation or the MVC URL validation in a much better manner, here's a sample project we have. So you can see that we have a very simple customer class here with ID, with customer code and amount. And this customer class we are using in the customer controller. So we have a very simple controller here called as customer, and inside the customer controller we are initializing the list of customer collections. And in the constructor, right, we are going and filling the customer in the collection. So you can see that we have filled two dummy data here, one with ID 12 and the other one with ID 11 in the customer collection. And we have a very simple action here called as display customer, which takes in ID, and it actually takes the ID and searches in the list, the generic list which we have created, and it returns back the object if it finds. And this object then we are passing to the display customer view, and we are displaying this object in the display customer view. So you can see that basically we are just going and passing the object to the display customer view, where we are displaying the ID, the customer code, etc. So very simple project. A simple customer model here. This model is created, a list of generic collection of the model is created in the customer controller class, and a very simple display customer function here to get the object, which is passed to the view, and the view displays the object. We have also customized the MVC URL here. So in order to invoke display customer function or the display customer action, we need to pass view/view customer and then the ID. So for example, currently we have two values here, one with ID 12 and the other one with ID 11. So let's say that if you want to invoke the 11th ID or the 12th ID, then you have to pass the structure as http localhost/view/view customer. So let's say that if you want to display the first customer, you have to just type 0 here, and it displays 12, and if you type 1, it displays 11. Right. So a very simple application, and with a basic customized URL route. Now we would like to do a couple of improvements on this MVC application. The first improvement which I would like to do here is that in case I don't pass any value, any customer ID, right, on the URL, it should show me some default value. So in other words, for example, if I try to browse something like this, http localhost/view/view customer, and if I press enter, then it should not throw me any kind of exception, but it should display me some kind of default value over here. So that's the first improvement. The second improvement which I would like to do here is the customer ID currently, right, is a numeric value, you can see. So I don't want people to type here any kind of alphanumeric values. For example, I don't want people to type here http localhost/view customer/view customer /view/view customer and something like this, shiv. Okay, so I would like people to type here alphanumeric values because the customer ID is numeric. So the second improvement which I would like to do here is that I would like to do certain kind of validations on the input parameters which are passed to the MVC controller. For example, currently if I try to pass this value, right, it will throw me this error here saying there is some kind of exception. Okay, so I would like to do two improvements here. First, setting the default values, and second, validating the inputs passed to the MVC controller. in order to pass default values, we can provide the default values when you create the route. So when we call the map route function, and in the map route function where we provide the route name, the URL parameters, the third section is where we can go and provide the parameter defaults or the default parameters. So here you can see that basically where we are assigning the controller and the action, we can go and provide here default values to the ID. So for example, I would like to say that in case if someone doesn't provide me the ID right from the browser, or when you call this action, the ID should be considered as value 0. Okay, so if I go and compile this application, and let me go now to my URL, and if I type here enter, you can see that by default it will now invoke the the default values. So in other words, the customer which is in the collection with the 0 index, right? And if I go and pass here 1, it actually displays me 11. So when any value is not provided on the URL, it will go and invoke this default value which is provided when you created the route. So this is the first improvement. The second improvement, which we talked about, is that I would like to go and validate this ID, saying that put a validation on this ID saying that it should only be numeric with 2 digits. So how do we do that? In .NET, we have a very nice validation component class called as regular expressions, or regex. Now regex are nothing but they are simple expressions by which we can define a pattern for validation, and then we can use those patterns to do validation. Now the good news is that we can use regex to do validations for the MVC URL, the inputs given to the MVC URL. So in order to apply regular expressions to the URL, right, when you add the map route, you can see that we have something called as constraints. So you can add a constraint to the route what you're adding. So over here what we can do is we can go and add a regular expression, something like this. You can see saying that the ID value can only have numerics. The /d applies that it's going to have only numerics, and the minimum value is 1, so the size is 1, right? And the maximum size or the maximum length of the numeric value is 2. So in other words, in order to apply validations or constraints to your URL, you can use the object constraint. So you can define new, the parameter name, and what kind of regular expressions you want to apply to the parameter. Now let's do something. Let's go and put a debug point here, which we have already put, and let me go and run this application. So yes, I want to debug, and let's go and say view customer /1. Okay, now as we said in the validation that when you provide more than 2 digits, it will not allow you to go and execute the display customer function. So let me just hit for 1 now first. You can see that for 1 it has gone ahead and executed the display customer function. Now let me go and provide 3-digit input here. Now the time I provide the 3-digit input, it doesn't go and hit the debug point, but rather it tells me the resource cannot be found. So in other words, as said in the validations that the maximum size you can provide is 1, and the minimum the maximum you can provide is 2, and the minimum you can provide is 1. So anything above that, it's showing me that the resource cannot be found. So in other words, the display function over here will only be hit when you provide integer values which are 2-digit. The time you are going to provide values which are more than 2-digit, it's not going to go and execute this display customer. So very nice way of validating your MVC URL inputs using regular expressions. Now the validation or the constraint on the URL is not just restricted to using restricted to use regular expressions. If you wish, like for example, let's say that you want to provide a validation where you want to say that whenever somebody makes a get, then only call the display customer. So in other words, if somebody is making a post, right, do not call this function. So for that, what you can do is basically you can go and add a constraint here. So let me just remove this constraint here. So you can go and add object constraint here stating that only allow to execute the function when there is a get, there is a HTTP get. So you can see that basically really the constraint, right, the constraint object over here is a very flexible parameter, and it will help you to basically define that how your URL route should be validated and how it should function. So I hope that you have enjoyed this video. So in this video what we did, basically we looked into that how we can provide default values as well as how we can do validations using the MVC MVC URL mechanism. I hope that you are enjoying the MVC tutorials. Now, one important point I would like to stress here. Do not try to see all the MVC videos in one day. Now, this is not only for the MVC videos, but for any tutorial you have on Questpond. Do not try to see all the videos in one day. It's very difficult to digest all the things in one day. See 2 videos, take a halt, come next day, see 2 videos, take a halt. So in this way, what happens is, you are consistent and you do not try to over digest the things in one day. So rather than digesting a lot of things in one day, take small things, take 1-2 videos, see them, stop, come the next day. So in this way, your enthusiasm will be maintained and you will also understand the topic well. Right. So in the coming up lab, that is lab number 9, we'll see that how we can define MVC outgoing URL. So till now what we have done, we have looked into how we can define MVC ingoing routes, how we can validate them. We have yet not talked about how we can define the MVC outgoing URLs. So in lab number 9, we will look into how we can define MVC outgoing URLs. Thanks a lot.